Yeah, fire up, A-Push students. Welcome to AP US History. This is Mr. Beemer, and hopefully that intro fired you up. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. I get excited about that stuff. But basically, we're going to begin the journey of trying to help you learn AP History, give you some information that's important to know, help you succeed in this class. And so hopefully get fired up for these rather dry keynotes. As you can see, this keynote's over 20 minutes long, and that's probably one of the shorter hopefully this is the longest keynote of the year. I just got to explain some things on how we do things in this class, so we'll try to keep them shorter in the future. This one's relatively long, so try to stay awake if you can. All right, so this is what we expect from you from this class. Okay, the first thing we need you to do is go to my website and click on the PDF of this keynote. You have a couple options. You can write out the whole thing from my website in a notebook if you want to, or you can print off the PDF version of it. And I try to keep 6 slides per page, so you're not printing off a ton of material. You don't have to do either. If you just want to keep it on your phone or just reference it, that's fine. I would encourage you to do one of these two things. So that's the first step in helping you understand the material. The second thing then we expect is for you guys to watch this presentation. Now, I don't even know if it's going to be exciting or not. I haven't done this before, but I'm going to highlight some key things that I think will be important for the class, possibly for future tests, and so I think it'll be beneficial to watch this. And I'm going to try to keep them under 15 minutes long. This one is going to go over, but that's probably the second step, is to watch these videos. The final step will be to read the book, and every keynote is going to cover a certain number of pages, and for this keynote presentation we're covering pages 6 to 14. Again, we'll try to keep it around 10 to 12 pages per night. It won't be every single night, but these are the 3 things we expect you to do, and I think you'll be successful. In class, we are not going to be going over the keynotes. Okay, we are going to be doing activities in class, work on writing skills. We're going to be doing things to help you succeed in this class. Instead of me standing up there lecturing, we are going to do activities to help you understand it even better. All right, let me quickly give you the highlights for every title page for every presentation. Every chapter is going to be broken down into 2 different parts, and we'll assign half the chapter a night, and each presentation will cover half the chapter. I already talked about the page numbers. Our first chapter is called New World Beginnings, and a key thing I want to mention here is in this class, A-Push, there are 9 historical periods. Okay, and this first chapter actually is the first period, 1491 to 1607. 1491 is the year before Columbus comes over to the New World. 1607 is the first English settlement of Jamestown, which we'll get to in Chapter 2. Also, something that really excites me a lot are quotes. And every chapter, the first page has a quote. A lot of times it's from somebody famous, maybe you've heard of or that you're going to need to know in history, but sometimes it's not a very famous person. Let's see if you can guess who said this quote. "I have come to believe that this is a mighty continent which was hitherto unknown." Hitherto, that's a word I have not seen in a few centuries. The final quote is, "Your Highnesses," so there's 2 people involved, "have an other world here." And this quote was given in the year 1498, and it was by, maybe you've heard of him, Christopher Columbus. Yeah. Wow, 3 minutes for the first slide. I hope the rest of the slides don't take this long. It's going to be a 48-minute video. That's probably too long even for me. Okay, let's get into some history. We got some key concepts for the first period we're going to talk about in this presentation. First thing, please note, is the year 1491. That's 1 year before Columbus comes over from Europe, and the year 1607, which we'll talk about in Chapter 2. The main key concept, there's a lot of words here, let's try to break it down. Before the arrival of the Europeans, so when Europe did not know anything about the New World, the natives of North and South America developed a wide variety of social, political, and economic structures. So they were successful civilizations. And the biggest thing that helped make them successful is the reliance on the environment, or the importance on the environment to their survival. Okay, 3 other key concepts. First one is the spread of maize cultivation. It's such an important idea we'll talk about over the next few slides. It begins in Mexico with the Aztecs, and then goes north with the Pueblos, and then eventually to the eastern part of North America. B is not really talked about much in your book, but it's an important concept, the Great Plains and the Great Basin region, which we'll look at a map later in this presentation. The key thing about the people living in these regions is that they lacked the resources. And so because there wasn't many natural resources, they had to move. They had to have a mobile, nomadic lifestyle, and they became what became known as hunter-gatherers. That was their type of economic system. In the northeastern part of North America, the groups there had a combination. They were somewhat hunter-gathering, but also they started to develop more agriculture, especially with maize cultivation. And this favored permanent villages. So the people in the Northeast tended to stay put because of farming. The most famous group is the Iroquois. All right, the final key concept has to do with a very important term in APUSH, the Colombian Exchange. The definition is here. It's basically the interaction between three continents and how it affected each of the three. We're going to talk about Europe, Africa, and the New World. We'll look at a map here in a second. And again, this changed the world forever. All right, so this map should hopefully help you understand what is involved with the Colombian Exchange. And so we'll start with the three different regions. Okay, so we have Europe, we have Africa, and we have the New World, North America. I think the most important thing we look at is what is being transferred between the different regions. So let's start in Europe. Ah! Scary, look at that. Unfortunately, that refers to diseases. And oh wow, look at all the different diseases that was transferred down to Africa and then went on to the Americas. Unfortunately, these diseases are going to wipe out approximately 90% of all the Native Americans living in the New World. Well, we need to look at something a little more positive. So let's look at the positive things that Europe brought with them to the New World and look at, I don't really care much about onions. Sorry about that. I meant horses over here became a huge positive for the Native Americans. It transformed their lifestyle, especially the nomadic tribes in the Great Basin, Great Plains region. In addition, some other important crops later on that are brought over include rice, and probably the biggest thing maybe is sugar that's brought over to the New World. Now let's look at what North America did to impact the Columbian Exchange. And so North America, if you look at all these things over here, basically they brought over a bunch of crops. And some of the most important crops for, unfortunately for the Irish, the potato. Oof, 1830s was a rough time period for them. We'll learn about that in APUSH. Corn becomes an important crop brought over as well. And maybe the biggest thing is, any guesses? Much as I love pumpkins, it's actually tobacco transforms Europe. Finally, I think there's something missing in the Columbian Exchange. A very important part of this exchange between Europe, Africa, and North America. Any guesses? Perhaps the most important thing, and probably definitely the saddest of it all, is slavery. Slaves are brought over from Africa to the New World throughout the next 200 to 300 years, unfortunately. Okay, the first page that you had to read is page 6, and the first section is the first discoverers of America. And if you see this heading, perhaps you're thinking about Columbus and the Europeans, and that is not the case. Okay, 35,000 years ago, most people lived on the Asian continent, and they traveled to North and South America via a land bridge. So this was all connected over 35,000 years ago. And so these were the first people that came over to America, and they overspread the North American continent and the South American continent as well. A couple other things I wanted to highlight is that on North and South America, there was an estimated 2,000 different languages spoken. So there's a vast differences in languages, so communication was more difficult. And by the year 1492, the year Columbus comes over from Europe, there's an estimated 72 million people living in North and South America. And in the next few sections, we're going to talk about the three most well-known groups, the Incas, the Mayas, and the Aztecs. All right, this map shows probably the three most famous Native American groups, and we're going to talk about them in the next three sections. In South America, this long stretch of land was controlled by the Incas. In Central America, we have the Mayas, and then in Central Mexico are the Aztecs. As I mentioned earlier, the Incas were located in South America along the Pacific Ocean. Um, Predominantly located, this is the most populous area, was up here located in modern-day Peru. I just think it's important to know that they were the largest pre-Columbian empire, and they had about 12 million people living in their group. Okay, here are the Mayas, located here in Central America. And I mentioned earlier that most Native American groups did not have written language, but the Mayas were one of the few exceptions. They actually had a written language, so we know a little bit about their past. And they also had some advances in art, architecture, math, agriculture, and astronomy. Okay, the final Native American group, famous group I should say, is the Aztec Empire, located in central Mexico of today. And the main city is Tenochtitlan. Let me just pause right here. Like my buddy John Green, I have a serious problem pronouncing words, and so you're going to have to bear with me. I really do the best I can, but my pronunciation is probably at a third grade level. Anyway, this city had a population of 200,000 during the height of the empire, and that is about the same size as Paris in the early 1500s. So it was a huge city. Another important point I cannot stress to you, maize is huge in Apush. Maize was developed first here. It fed the people. It allowed to have such a large population. And that cultivation of maize did eventually spread northward to the Pueblos and then further off into North America. Finally, I have on here this Aztec calendar. I think it's beautiful. It's an interesting piece of art. And I'm so proud that I actually have one of these. One of my exchange students gave me this in 2010. Maybe I actually have the real thing. I don't even know. But Maurizio, thank you so much. Fire up. Hey, we're halfway done with the presentation, so on this pace we'll be done in a half hour. Now hopefully only like 5 or 6 more minutes. Anyway, the next section is called the earliest Americans, and as I mentioned earlier, corn and maize, so important, was developed first in Mexico by the Aztecs, and so I think that it's important that it first of all fed the native groups, but also I think it allowed many of the groups to stop being the hunter-gatherers, especially if their land allowed them to farm it. And this gives rise to the towns and cities. As I mentioned earlier, the Pueblo Indians in the Southwest were the first Americans to grow maize, spread northward. And I think this is a very important point as well. The Pueblos constructed intricate irrigation systems to water their corn. That's, I think, very important to know. Although this is not a section in the textbook, it's part of it is in there. And we're going to talk about the Iroquois Confederation. First of all, the location is located in present-day New York State, and the Iroquois actually had a flag, which very few of these Native American groups had a flag. And so I would say in North America, it was probably the most famous, most powerful, if you will, group, similar to the Incas and the Aztecs, but still not near as powerful or as large as them. Another thing I think it's important to know about the Iroquois is that they actually had 5 tribes in this region that actually banded together to help each other out for common defense as well. And I think important to know in APUSH is, as in many of these Native American groups, possessions and authority pass through the female line. So in England, and when America comes about, especially early in the colonial time, all possessions and titles would stay with the male, but in Native Americans, it was with the females, and I think that gave the females more power than women in England or America. I love maps. I love maps. Big map guy. Love dates. So this map is of North America, and the year I want to point out is 1492. So that's basically when Columbus comes to the New World. And so we've got many regions and many tribes we need to talk about. Now on here there's literally dozens and dozens of different Native American groups, and you're not going to have to know all of them. You only have to know a few of them, and I'll highlight that, and also some regions I wanted to highlight. So first I want to highlight 2 of them that are related. It's the Great Basin and also the Great Plains, located about here and here. And again, earlier, I think in the second slide, I mentioned that this region, they were not agricultural economy. They really did not develop maize, mostly because of the environment. Okay, they had limited resources, so they were hunter-gatherers looking for food wherever they can find it. So they did not really settle down into different villages or towns. Now we're going to move to the southwest, okay, in this region down here. And from this region, the most important one, hopefully you can see in there which one's most important of the tribes. It's definitely the Pueblos. You need to know them, that they develop irrigation to help produce the maize. The next region I wanted to mention was the southeast, and I just wanted to highlight one important tribe here, and that is the Cherokees, and they're going to become very important, especially later in A push when we study, unfortunately, the Trail of Tears. The final region is the eastern woodlands, or the east, and in this section, if you want to guess, the most important tribe is right here, is the Iroquois. Again, they were predominantly agricultural economy. They were mixed, but predominantly agricultural economy. And finally, I'll just mention down here in the south are the Aztecs. And of course, maize was developed there and eventually spreads north towards the Pueblos. In A Push, there are 7 themes that we're going to talk about throughout the year. And this slide talks about beliefs, ideas, and cultures. And so the Native Americans and the Europeans definitely had some different beliefs between the two different groups. Now, before we go over this slide, I just want you, when you see the terms Native Americans, I just want you to stop and just think what image comes to your mind. Okay, here's the image of Native Americans, and maybe that's not what you were thinking, but this group of people we'll actually talk about later in this class in the year. This is a Native American group. Now let's talk about Europeans. All right, what image do you have of Europeans? Go. Here's the image that Mr. Venor thinks of every time he thinks of Europeans. I kid you not. One Direction. Seriously. All right, let's get into the content then. All right, so what are the differences in their beliefs between the groups? Well, these are generalizations, but in general, this is what most of them believed. Firstly, Native Americans felt that no man owned the land, okay, and that Europeans and even Americans today like the idea of owning land, owning private property. So that is a conflict idea right there. More conflicting ideas. Number 2, Indians felt that nature was mixed with many spirits. Europeans, Christians, think there is one God. Number 3, Indians felt nature itself was sacred, and that's an important idea for the groups of people. And Europeans, on the other hand, in general, believe that nature was given to and land were given to man by God to be subdued and to put to use. So again, there's conflicting views there. And the fourth one becomes a big issue during this time period, is that Indians had little or no concept or interest in money. Europeans love money, and especially gold. And so this is going to be a big conflict. I think of the movie Pocahontas. John Smith's like, hey, Pocahontas, where's the gold? Gold? What's gold? By the way, I love Disney as well. My favorite movie is Frozen. Number 2, Tangled, incredible. 3, Avatar. That wasn't Disney, but it's still a good movie. Okay, the next section is indirect discoveries of the New World. And just wanted to mention the Vikings. Okay, they actually were the first Europeans to discover the New World, North and South America, around the year 1000 Common Era CE, and they discovered this tip up here in Newfoundland. But because they didn't write down what they found, they did not get credit for it, unfortunately for them. A key point we'll get to more in the next section. By the year 1300, Europeans were exposed to exotic goods from Asia, spices, sugars, perfumes, so on, and so they started to want these things. Well, if you want these things, you got to go to Asia. The problem is, how do you get there? And we'll talk about how they got there next slide. Marco Polo. All right, I'll stop. Year 1295, man, Italian named Marco Polo traveled to China from Italy, from Europe. He traveled here, and you went a land route to do that, and he stirred up interest for the exotic goods that I mentioned in the previous slide. But that was expensive to go by land. It took a long time, and so 150 years later, after unfortunately the Black Death, they started to try to find different ways to get, Portugal is not the Black Death, sorry about that, trying to get different ways to India, China, Asia, and so they decided to try to find a way by water. Okay, and so they decided to eventually try to go around the southern tip of Africa. The problem is, a lot of the prevailing winds down here were going northward, and so a lot of these ships had a hard time going into the wind. But new developments in technology, and technology is such an important idea. It's one of the 7 themes in A Push. Technology improves throughout history, and so this ship called the caravel, this type of ship allows ships to travel into the wind a lot easier. And so by the year 1497, they go down to the tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. And then 2 years later, or 1 year later, I should say, they eventually do go around the tip of Africa to India. Again, I think an important point is these are Portuguese sailors. So Portugal really controlled and dominated the sailing along the African coast this way. Okay, Christopher Columbus, when he discovered America, was not doing it for Portugal. He was doing it for a different country, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, we're going to continue with this section and talk about more of Portuguese exploration. Unfortunately, a consequence of their exploration around Africa is the beginning of the slave trade. And these slaves were captured in Africa by other Africans and also by some Arabs, and they were brought along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean to be sold to the Portuguese as slaves. Now, originally, the Portuguese did not bring these slaves over to the New World because it hasn't been discovered yet by Europeans, but they brought them to sugar plantations that were located off Africa's coast. And we'll look at the map here right now. So looking at the map, there are a couple islands off the coast of Africa, and you don't need to know these islands' names, but I do need you to know that there were sugar plantations on these islands, and as we talked about earlier, Europeans had a love of sugar and spices. And so these sugar plantations needed labor, and so they used the African slaves as their source of labor. So the Portuguese were able to make money off of selling these African slaves. Around this time, another country saw the success and wealth of Portugal, and that was the Spanish. And Spain saw this and said, hey, we need to get into some exploring as well so we can become a powerful country, a powerful nation state, and get a lot of gold. Our final slide for today is Columbus comes upon a new world in that fateful year of 1492. This year is one of the most significant years in world history. And so in this section, the first thing we need to know is that Columbus was able to go to the New World because of 2 people, Isabella and Ferdinand, the Queen and King of Spain. They helped pay for his exploration. Now, as we mentioned earlier, he didn't know there was a New World. He was trying to get to the East Indies by sailing west. Okay, the East Indies are located over here. And so basically Columbus was going to go this way, didn't know there was a bunch of land over here, and planned to come from the west. Now, we know Portugal went around Africa, so Columbus was going to go that route. He was going to go west. And after 30 days at sea, and his sailors were a little bit nervous, he actually does spot land here in Hispaniola, and he makes land. But he does not make the East Indies. He discovers, for the Europeans, an entirely new continent. And so this begins the Colombian Exchange. And again, I cannot stress enough the importance of this term. Basically, it begins the Colombian Exchange, where Europe is going to provide the market, capital, and technology. It's going to affect Africa, unfortunately, because it provides the slave labor. And the New World is going to provide the raw materials, gold, soil, lumber, food. But especially the European nations, they wanted the gold.